The small brown bottle, first mixed in a North Carolina pharmacy in the summer of 1893, became, over the course of more than a century, the flagship of a food and beverage empire that today generates close to $94 billion in annual net revenue and reaches more than 200 countries. The company that carries its name, PepsiCo, controls a portfolio that includes Lay's, Doritos, Cheetos, Gatorade, Mountain Dew, Quaker, Tropicana, and SodaStream, alongside the drink that started it all. The history behind that ubiquity is not a straight line. It includes 2 full bankruptcies, 1 detour through a candy business, a Cold War barter arrangement with the Soviet Union, a nationally televised pyrotechnic accident, a marketing strategy that reshaped how American brands spoke to their consumers, and a rivalry with a soft drink company in Atlanta that lasted longer than most modern corporations exist. To follow that history properly, it helps to begin with a druggist named Caleb Bradham and a soda fountain in a small port city on the Neuse River. Caleb Bradham was born in 1867 in Chinquapin, North Carolina, studied at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and briefly attended medical school at the University of Maryland before family financial difficulties forced him back to his home state. He taught for a short time and then opened Bradham Drug Company, a pharmacy on the corner of Middle Street and Pollock Street in downtown New Bern. Like most American drugstores at the end of the 19th century, his shop included a marble soda fountain, and it was there, in 1893, that he began serving a mixture he called Brad's Drink. The recipe combined cola nut extract, vanilla, sugar, and, according to Bradham himself, a small number of what he described as rare oils. He served it to customers who came in for a headache remedy or a summer refreshment, and it slowly developed a following among local residents who returned to the counter specifically to ask for the drink by name. On August 28, 1898, Bradham renamed the beverage Pepsi-Cola, combining a reference to the digestive complaint dyspepsia with the word cola, and marketed it as a tonic that aided digestion while providing energy. The medical claim mirrored the broader habits of the late 19th century soft drink trade, in which many carbonated beverages were introduced as patent remedies. On December 24, 1902, Bradham incorporated the Pepsi-Cola Company in North Carolina and served as its first. On June 16, 1903, he registered the Pepsi-Cola trademark with the United States Patent Office and began licensing the syrup to independent bottlers across the American South, using a franchise model similar to the one already established by his larger competitor in Atlanta. By 1910, Pepsi-Cola was being bottled by more than 300 licensees across 24 states, and Bradham was operating from a headquarters in New Bern that combined syrup production, marketing, and franchise administration under one roof. He recruited race car driver Barney Oldfield as an early celebrity endorser, invested in newspaper and streetcar advertising, and expanded the franchise map through a personal network of pharmacists, grocers, and traveling salesmen. For roughly a decade, the company grew steadily, and Bradham became a prominent civic figure in New Bern, serving on local boards and taking an active role in the North Carolina National Guard. To many customers in that period, Pepsi-Cola looked like a regional success story with the potential to compete nationally with Coca-Cola. The First World War changed the arithmetic of the sugar market, and with it, the future of the Pepsi-Cola Company. Wartime shortages and post-war disruptions pushed the price of sugar from roughly 3 cents per pound before the war to a peak of around 28 cents per pound in 1920. Bradham, anticipating continued high prices, purchased a large quantity of sugar at the peak. When the market collapsed shortly afterward and prices fell back to pre-war levels, the company was left holding inventory worth a fraction of what he had paid for it. On May 31, 1923, the original Pepsi-Cola Company declared bankruptcy. A group of creditors took control of the trademark, patents, and remaining assets for reportedly around $30,000, and the company that Bradham had built passed out of his hands. He returned to running his pharmacy and never again played a significant role in the business he had founded. Later in 1923, a Wall Street financier named Roy McGargel purchased the assets from the creditors for a modest sum and reorganized the company. Over the next 8 years, he tried repeatedly to restore Pepsi-Cola's national footprint, moving operations, courting new bottlers, and pouring in additional capital. The company was renamed the National Pepsi-Cola Corporation, but the arrival of the Great Depression compounded existing problems, and on June 8, 1931, Pepsi-Cola entered bankruptcy for the second time in 8 years. To most industry observers, the brand appeared to be finished. The trademark had passed through 2 failed corporations, its franchise network had shrunk dramatically, and the country was in no condition to underwrite the recovery of a marginal soft drink brand. The company was rescued from that second failure by Charles Guth, the head of Loft Candy, a New York-based confectionery chain that operated a large network of retail stores with soda fountains. Guth had used Coca-Cola syrup at Loft's counters, but according to public accounts, he had asked Coca-Cola for a wholesale discount that reflected Loft's volume and had been refused. In 1931, he arranged for Loft to acquire the trademark and syrup formula of the twice-bankrupt Pepsi-Cola company for a reported price of roughly $10,500, though the exact figure and the legal structure of the purchase later became the subject of years of litigation between Guth and Loft's shareholders. Guth's plan was straightforward. He would install Pepsi-Cola at every Loft soda fountain, secure a captive distribution base, and rebuild the franchise network from there. The strategy that turned the company around was set in motion during the depths of the Great Depression. In 1934, Guth began selling Pepsi-Cola in a 12-ounce bottle at the same nickel price that Coca-Cola charged for its standard 6.5-ounce bottle. To a consumer stretched thin by economic contraction, the value proposition was direct. Sales climbed sharply through the middle of the decade. A radio jingle broadcast beginning in 1939 with the lyric that promised twice as much for a nickel ran on hundreds of American stations and became one of the most recognized advertisements of the pre-war era. By the end of the decade, Pepsi-Cola had a functioning national bottling network again, and the parent company had shifted from candy-focused Loft into a beverage-focused corporation, eventually renamed simply the Pepsi-Cola Company. The post-war period brought a professionalization of the company under a series of executives, including Walter Mack and Alfred Steele, who continued to build out the bottling franchise network and to sharpen the brand's positioning against Coca-Cola. Steele's marriage to actress Joan Crawford brought Pepsi celebrity attention that the company used strategically, particularly in bottler meetings and public events. The brand remained a distant number 2 in most American markets, but by the late 1950s, it had a coherent distribution system, a stable financial base, and a management team looking for a broader strategic identity. The next generation of leadership would find that identity by expanding beyond the American market and beyond soft drinks entirely. In July 1959, at the American National Exhibition in Moscow, a 38-year-old Pepsi-Cola executive named Donald Kendall arranged for Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev to be photographed sampling a cup of Pepsi. The moment came at the same exhibition where Vice President Richard Nixon and Khrushchev held what became known as the kitchen debate, and the resulting image of Khrushchev drinking an American soft drink circulated widely in the United States. Kendall had campaigned inside the company for the Moscow assignment and used the exposure to accelerate his rise. He was named president of the Pepsi-Cola Company in 1963. The Moscow photograph became a foundational moment in Kendall's personal narrative and in the company's argument that Pepsi could compete internationally against a rival that dominated the domestic market. In 1963, the company launched what its executives would later describe as the first modern lifestyle-based advertising campaign in the American soft drink industry. Advertising executive Alan Pottasch developed the concept behind the Pepsi Generation. Rather than describing product attributes such as taste, price, or ingredients, the campaign described a type of consumer and invited viewers to identify with that consumer. The winning slogan, submitted by Ellen M. Reimer of Appleton, Wisconsin, through a company contest, read, "Come alive, you're the Pepsi Generation." The jingle was performed by singer Joni Summers, and the campaign targeted the emerging baby boom demographic directly. The idea that a soft drink brand should sell a generational identity rather than a product feature reshaped consumer advertising broadly and became a template later adopted by advertisers in categories far removed from beverages. In 1965, Kendall executed the transaction that redefined the company. Pepsi-Cola merged with Frito-Lay, the Dallas-based snack food business built by Herman Lay, to form a new holding company called PepsiCo Inc. Kendall became chief executive officer and Lay became chairman of the board. Kendall's public rationale was that salty snack foods and carbonated soft drinks reinforced each other at the point of consumption, a logic he later summarized in the observation that potato chips make people thirsty and Pepsi satisfies thirst. The strategic significance of the merger was larger than the single insight suggested. It committed the company to a diversified food and beverage identity, gave it access to a second national distribution channel, and made it structurally different from its main competitor. In 1972, PepsiCo signed a barter agreement with the government of the Soviet Union that made it the first American consumer brand to establish a formal commercial presence inside the country. Because Soviet rubles were not convertible on international currency markets, the deal was structured as an exchange rather than a cash transaction. PepsiCo delivered cola concentrate to Soviet bottlers and in return received exclusive Western distribution rights to Stolichnaya vodka along with additional Soviet products. The arrangement reflected the détente policies of the early 1970s under General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev and President Richard Nixon. And it grew over subsequent decades into a barter relationship that at various points reportedly included ships as part of the exchange, though the details of those later arrangements are disputed and difficult to fully verify. Pepsi's presence in Soviet cities became one of the more visible examples of American consumer culture penetrating the Cold War economy. In 1975, PepsiCo launched the Pepsi Challenge, a marketing program built around blind taste tests conducted in shopping centers, malls, and public spaces across the United States. Consumers were presented with 2 unmarked cups and asked which they preferred. The company publicized aggregate results indicating that a majority of participants chose Pepsi over Coca-Cola, and used those results in television and print advertising for years. The methodology was later criticized by researchers and journalists, including Malcolm Gladwell, who argued that sip tests tend to favor sweeter beverages regardless of consumer preference over an entire serving. The debate over methodology, however, did not undo the campaign's commercial effect. Pepsi's market share in supermarkets rose during the late 1970s, and the pressure on Coca-Cola became severe enough that the Atlanta company began to consider whether its own formula needed to change. That pressure culminated in April 1985 when Coca-Cola announced a reformulated version of its flagship product, quickly nicknamed New Coke. The reformulation was widely interpreted, both inside and outside the industry, as a response to the taste test pressure applied by the Pepsi Challenge, and it produced a consumer backlash of a scale that surprised the company. On July 11, 1985, Coca-Cola announced the return of its original formula under the name Coca-Cola Classic. Pepsi executives publicly celebrated the moment as a strategic victory. In the broader arc of the Cola Wars, however, both companies emerged with strengthened brands, and the following decades would see Coca-Cola retain a modest overall lead in most global markets, while Pepsi expanded aggressively in food, snacks, and non-carbonated drinks. The 1980s also brought the endorsement partnerships that came to define Pepsi's public image in that decade. In 1984, the company signed Michael Jackson to a multi-year advertising contract at a reported value of around $5 million, an unusually large figure at the time. On January 27, 1984, during the filming of a commercial at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles, a pyrotechnic effect misfired and ignited Jackson's hair, causing second-degree burns to his scalp. PepsiCo reached a settlement out of court with Jackson for approximately $1.5 million, which Jackson donated to what became the Michael Jackson Burn Center at the Brotman Medical Center in Culver City. The company continued its endorsement strategy through the decade, adding Lionel Richie, Tina Turner, Michael J. Fox, and later Ray Charles, framing the brand as the drink of celebrity, youth, and cultural movement. In 1997, PepsiCo executed a strategic reversal that reshaped its corporate structure. The company spun off its restaurant division, which included Pizza Hut, Taco Bell and KFC, into a separate publicly traded company that was initially named Tricon Global Restaurants and later renamed Yum Brands in 2002. The rationale was that the restaurant business required different capital allocation and operational focus than the packaged goods business, and that PepsiCo should concentrate on beverages and snacks. In 1998, the company acquired Tropicana Products for approximately $3.25 billion. In August 2001, it completed a merger with the Quaker Oats Company, valued at approximately $13.5 billion, which brought Gatorade, Quaker cereals and grain-based products, and Rice-A-Roni into the PepsiCo portfolio, and cemented the company's identity as a diversified food and beverage holding. From 2006 to 2018, Indra Nooyi served as chief executive officer and repositioned the corporate strategy around a framework she called Performance with Purpose. Nooyi reclassified PepsiCo's portfolio into three categories, described publicly as fun for you, better for you, and good for you, and shifted internal investment toward reduced sugar, reduced salt, and reduced fat product lines. The strategy attempted to address the growing regulatory and public health scrutiny of sugared soft drinks, obesity trends in American consumers, and the accelerating decline of carbonated soft drink volumes in developed markets. The results were mixed. PepsiCo's revenue grew substantially over her tenure, but activist investors periodically pressured the company to spin off its beverage business, arguing that snacks and beverages had diverged strategically. Nooyi retired in 2018 and was succeeded by Ramon Laguarta, who had led the company's European operations. Under Laguarta, PepsiCo has continued to expand its snacks business, invested in emerging categories such as energy drinks through partnerships with Celsius and acquisitions such as Rockstar Energy, and moved into functional and healthier product lines through acquisitions including SodaStream. Reported net revenue for the 2025 fiscal year approached $94 billion, according to filings the company made with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the company remains among the largest food and beverage groups in the world. At the same time, sales of the flagship Pepsi-Cola brand within the United States have continued to face headwinds tied to shifting consumer preferences, competition from private label brands, and long-term declines in carbonated soft drink consumption. The company has responded by tightening its cost structure, restructuring some of its North American operations, and investing more heavily in non-carbonated categories. The legacy of Pepsi-Cola, viewed in full, is inseparable from the American consumer century that produced it. A drink first sold in a New Bern pharmacy became a national brand, collapsed twice, was rescued by a candy company, transformed itself through wartime pricing and post-war advertising, invented lifestyle marketing as a mass discipline, entered the Cold War as a diplomatic symbol, provoked its larger rival into a reformulation that failed, defied celebrity endorsement in the 1980s, and finally reorganized itself as a diversified food business built around snacks and non-carbonated beverages. What remains unresolved is whether the brand at the center of that history, the small blue and red bottle whose recipe dates back to 1893, can retain its cultural weight in a consumer environment that increasingly treats carbonated soft drinks as a legacy category rather than an everyday habit. The company that owns the name has become considerably larger than the drink itself, and its next chapter will likely be written more in snacks and functional beverages than in the syrup Caleb Bradham first mixed at a soda fountain more than 130 years ago.